Hi, and welcome back to our occasional series of Storyteller Talks. My name is Joan, and I am the storyteller of our Werewolf the Apocalypse 20th Anniversary Edition campaign at Song of Tara. This episode is going to deal with an issue that has recently come up in A Song of Tara and which occasionally comes up in any other campaign I run. For that matter, it probably comes up in a lot of campaigns that the rest of you either play in or that you run yourselves. And this issue is character death. Obviously, this is a serious matter, and it's something that a lot of players and a lot of storytellers or GMs find quite problematic when it happens. It can create negative feelings internally in a group, and it feels, it usually feels at least, unpleasant for everyone involved. Let it be said all in advance that I do not particularly enjoy character death, neither as a player nor as a GM. The reason for this is one, as a player at least, is one that I'm pretty sure everybody else who's ever experienced this can relate to, namely that I put a significant amount of work into the characters I play, and they are characters I want to play. They're characters I want to see rise to the occasion, fulfill their potential, and be the big damn heroes, to use a Firefly reference, or at least, well, in a very few cases, the big damn villains. If you're playing a bad guys campaign, an evil campaign, such as the Pathfinder campaign, Way of the Wicked, or a homebrewed campaign of the same kind. When you play villains, when you play villains, first and foremost, you should probably expect it a little bit more, because quite frankly, you are supposed to be the bad guys, and the bad guys always lose in the end, don't they? Well, in a campaign like that, obviously they might actually win, but it's still quite likely that at least some of them are going to bite the dust along the way. But even when you play the heroes, it can happen. It can happen for a number of different reasons. Although usually, of course, it happens because, it happens because of combat. It happens because a player character, a player character gets beaten up so badly in a fight that they die. But it's not the only way it happens. When I was a kid, many years ago, one of my formative experiences as a role player and as a GM, in fact, was when I read the classic Dungeons and Dragons series of books, the Dragonlance Chronicles, and in that this series of books was basically, it was created based on a campaign which the authors of the series ran. There were two authors, and in that series of books, character death occurred. One of the most talked about at that time was the character death of a so-called Solamnian knight by the name of Sturm Brightblade. Sturm gets killed in a very epic kind of way, holding a castle wall single-handedly against a dragon high lord, which is, well, in this case was a human riding a blue dragon. It was an absolutely epic situation where he gets stabbed through the chest with a powerful weapon, a powerful lance, and he and the description says that the sun explodes before his eyes, and he sinks down and dies in a heap, and it's all very, very sad, and for quite a few pages afterwards, I at least sat there thinking, no, 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 he can't be dead. There is such a thing as resurrection or raised dead spells or something. He can't possibly be gone, and well, he was. But there was also another very, very touching death in that series, namely an elderly dwarf who was also a part of the group of characters. His name was, as I recall, was Flint, and he simply passed away of old age. He died in an absolutely peaceful manner in a situation which, as I recall, had an even bigger impact. It was even more tragic because he had been incredibly heroic along the way in this campaign, and then suddenly he just wasn't there anymore, and it was, I suppose it was a bit like experiencing a friend passing away. At least it was for me at the time, because being young and impressionable, I formed a sort of relationship to these characters, which was probably slightly unhealthy in how much I appreciated them. I mean, they were fictional characters, but bear in mind I was 11 when I wrote these. When I wrote, no, I certainly didn't write them. When I read these books, and of course, both of these at the time seemed unfair, because the heroes were supposed to win. They weren't supposed to die. They were supposed to, in the end, overcome all the odds, and as I usually call it, they were supposed to end up in being Captain Awesome, standing on top of a mountain of enemy corpses, waving a flag around, and it's an overused trope. I've since grown to realize this, that it's simply an overused trope, that it's something that practically every movie, practically every book, and practically every role-playing game ends up with, and it's just not it's not realistic. It's flat. At least it's flat in my opinion. And it is because it does not present an image of actually overcoming the odds. It doesn't present an image of a struggle that you have to actually sacrifice something to achieve victory in the end. That being said, I'm not advocating that there should at any cost be character death in any campaign you play. I'm just saying, in my opinion, it is not something to avoid. It is something, when it happens, that can be used as a GM or even as a player to further the story and to give it an even more emotional twist, to give it something that it might otherwise lack, namely a deep kind of emotional investment in a storyline. In my own example, and in the case of A Song at Tara, we recently saw the death of the character Aaron Blackwell. Now, Aaron was killed off camera. This happened because the player of that character, Daniel, is, for entirely private reasons, is no longer part of the campaign. And because of that, I somehow had to write his character out of the campaign. And while normally I would usually say, oh, but he simply leaves Dublin overnight and leaves a heartwarming message to his pack that he has to deal with his father's evil, and for them to please stay behind and save Dublin and Ireland and all these kinds of things. That wasn't an option because of the great the great reality altering shield that surrounds Dublin, which prevents supernatural creatures from either entering or leaving, and this field, this shield, if you would, of supernatural travel prevention is an important part of the campaign. For that reason, Aaron simply couldn't leave, And for him to no longer be available in the campaign, I had to do something pretty drastic. I spoke to the player if he was okay with what happened. I outlined what I had planned, and he said he was all right with that. Failing to achieve some kind of consensus on that, obviously, I would have had to come up with something else, which would have been more mysterious, but probably also less emotionally investing for the player, such as having him vanish in the deep umbra or whatever, because then the players might have had a quest on their hands where they would say, "Oh, we have to go find our lost friend." The problem, of course, in doing so is that when they eventually found him, then what? He wouldn't be able to rejoin the campaign, so something drastic would have had to happen to him. At least this way, he got an exceptionally heroic end. He killed a small army of vampires before he went out, and in going out, he helped set up a future direction for the campaign in this open war that has now broken out between the werewolves and the vampires. More than that, he had an enormous impact on his friends in dying. They were emotionally deeply affected by this. They were angry, of course. They were overtaken with grief. We saw a lot of frenzy checks, and one of them, in the case of the remaining Arun Connell, actually failed, and he went absolutely nuts and totaled most of the apartment in which they found the remains of Aaron. Consequently, this specific character death actually helped further the campaign, and it helped give the other players something to rally around, something that was definitely a unifying element in the story, where the pack was drawn closer together in their grief. In that way, character death can be extremely useful both to the players and to the GM. That said, it is still very important that it is handled correctly. Simply killing off a character, simply simply killing someone willy-nilly, if you would, because you, as the storyteller, feels that let's see how this is going to further my campaign, and then twisting the campaign in a way where one or more characters will die with absolute certainty is, of course, also a problem. The reason for this being a problem is primarily that the players will very easily feel that they have been screwed, not to put too fine a point on it, that they've been put in a situation which is a no-win, where there's no way out whatsoever. The way I usually look at horrible situations like that is a little bit like if you think about the 1960s kitsch Batman television show. These were always two-parters, where at the end of part one, it ended on a cliffhanger with Batman and his trusty sidekick Robin placed in some kind of horrific death trap from which there was certainly no way out, with the enemy monologuing the entire thing and telling them all their evil plans, because ha 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 ha, you are never going to escape anyway. And then, Batman would pull out his bat anti-shark spray or something along those lines, and they would escape anyway at the beginning of episode 2. Completely unharmed, and they would then go on to use their newfound knowledge of the evildoer's horrible schemes to go and actually stop aforementioned evildoer. Now, I'm not really a fan of the monologuing part of this thing, but I am a fan of the fact that that there was a way out of every horrific death trap. In a role-playing situation, there doesn't have to be a way out of these death traps in the same easy way, but there should be some way out. It should be that if the players think if they actually think about a solution, if they actually try to come up with something reasonable and rational, my opinion as a storyteller is at least give it a chance of working. Let the players be rewarded for creativity. If you have some kind of idea as a storyteller saying, "Oh, but they can only escape in this one specific way that I have decided beforehand," please remember that the players can't read your mind, and if you create a suitably convoluted way for them to get out, the chance is that they will never second guess it because they think in different ways. They will never be able, and afterwards you will probably sit there and feel, but it was so simple. You should only have done X, Y, or Z, and the players will say, yeah, sure, I should have seen it," and they will sit there feeling like you've just bullshitted them. Quite frankly, you've pulled a fast one on them in order to kill one of their characters off. That sort of thing creates resentment. Um, However, a character death done properly can lead to a good feeling, even for the player whose character lost and ended up dying. There might be a bittersweet feeling involved, you surely, certainly, but my opinion is that if a character death serves a greater purpose, and if it is, well, at least in most cases, or at least in some cases, suitably epic, then it can actually work. Then it doesn't have to hurt, or at least not hurt nearly as badly. Going back to my examples from before of the two Dragonlance characters, if my character personally had an end as absolutely epic as the one Sturm Brightblade experienced, where he literally defended his entire order of knights and all of the world, really, by standing up to this massively powerful enemy with whom he had a previous friendship, and which had of course soured quite dramatically. Then he would his death in that situation was so epic and so magnificent that he has gone down in role-playing lore, at least for people who played back then in those olden days, as a byword for heroics. He is still, and was, at least until a significant part of the 90s has passed, he was pretty much he was pretty much seen as an exemplar of how character death could be absolutely incredibly heroic and fulfilling, even for the player who played the character. Conversely, the example of the dwarf dying, who died peacefully of old age, was seen as this is a way in which you can write a character out of a campaign in a way which is incredibly bittersweet, which is peaceful, and yet still has a lasting and in many ways positive impact on the campaign going forward. And obviously this can be one of the problems. How can you ever possibly see the death of a character, both as a GM but certainly as the player of that character, as a positive? How can that ever be a good thing because something has been removed from the campaign that was originally there, or which had at least been there for a part of the campaign's lifespan? And it can be because, as I said, if you can involve the characters in it, then they can find renewed direction, renewed purpose in such a thing. They can, not to put too fine a point on it, they can go in this example from before, they can go they can gain a new battle cry, quite frankly, of for our friends, or for Sturm, or for Flint, or whatever. And in the case of the players in A Song of Tara, they can they can sit there, grit their teeth, and go, we're going to do this, and we're going to do it for Aaron, and that's going to help propel them forward in a new and very purposeful kind of way. So this is how it can appear. And for me, as as a storyteller or as a GM, it is extremely important that when something like that happens, to not downplay it. This is my advice to any storyteller out there. Let it be important. Whether it is because a character was killed in combat or died peacefully, whether it's because that player in question needs to then make a new character and rejoin the team in a new guise, or if it's because the character and the player have, well, the player has left the campaign and the character therefore needs to go. Whether, which one of those two, or even if it's something completely different from that, whenever a character dies, don't gloss it over. Don't downplay it. In the case of Aaron's death, I made an effort to create a scene where his friend walks through the apartment with an increasing sense of foreboding and fear that, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, something absolutely horrible has happened here. Something dreadful, something that can only end badly, because that character walked through a pile of vampire corpses, some of them of vampires so recently created that they hadn't actually decomposed yet, and a couple of piles of dust from older vampires to show that Aaron had in fact also faced serious opponents, dangerous, really dangerous opponents. I made it clear that there were bullet holes in the walls, and obviously there were silver bullets still stuck in those holes in the wall. And that way, when finally, in this case, Taliesin, when he finally arrived in the living room where he found Aaron sprawled across the sofa, with his head hanging over the armrest on the sofa and one arm slung over the back, and his one leg down on the floor, basically having finally collapsed on his back in from his wounds, and having fought off these horrific odds, and he then sees this vile, taunting message from the group's arch nemesis, Victoria Rogers, written on the back wall in Aaron's blood. By that point, the player was pretty much ready to just burst out in tears, because this was dreadful. This had not just been handled willy-nilly. This wasn't a matter of him just, you open the door, you see Aaron lying dead on the floor. That's anticlimactic. That would have been me not giving a damn about the character having died. I wanted this to actually have an impact. This is what I would recommend that other people do as well. Obviously, this isn't possible if it happens, real time in a fight situation where you are sitting there and the dice simply determine that a character dies. If that happens, then obviously you don't have time to build up a scene in the same kind of narrative way, but you can still make it mean something, whether it's because a character dies heroically fighting off an army of powerful evildoers, or if it's because they get run through by a goblin in a fantasy setting. Either situation needs to be handled with some kind of respect for the work that the character has represented, some kind of respect for the fact that the player has actually taken the time to sit down and make a character that means something to them, or at least hopefully that's what they've done. And in a situation like that, narrate it. Don't just say, the goblin runs you through, you're dead, make a new character. Don't just say, you hold the position for 5 minutes and then you get overrun by the forces of horrific evil that's bearing down on you, and they now pour down further into the hinterlands, and you go on, make a new character. That is not, in my opinion, that is not sufficient, and it doesn't respect the character, and it doesn't respect the player, and it certainly doesn't respect the work that the player has put into it. make it cinematic. If you're a storyteller, if you're a GM, you are first and foremost responsible for setting a scene and telling a story. The players then experience this story. And if that means something to a GM, they should be able to narrate it in some way. They, ask for a couple of minutes to think up something suitable if you're not comfortable coming up with something on the fly, but give the player something to go out on. Give them, however unepic the situation might seem. Then, as explained before, the goblin having a being lucky on the dice, rolling a critical and knocking the last few hit points off your character or whatever. Narrate how the character is fending off evil goblins from all other angles, and suddenly turns his head at the last moment, and with a look of horror on his features, he sees this one goblin that he had overlooked, or which he hadn't managed to actually fend off yet, barreling down upon him with his pig sticker of a sword out in front or something. Give the player something to go out on. Give the other players something to be motivated by. And as a player, if you experience something like this, my one advice is don't resent it. You can feel bad about it. Certainly, again, you've put in some work into this, but don't resent the GM for doing it. The GM has a responsibility to run the game, and I know that a lot of GMs out there fudge the dice in order to prevent character death. This is a common problem. I've experienced it. I've played role-playing games for 30 years. I've lost count of the number of GMs that I've played with who's done this, and who later on admitted it. And to me, that has always, well, not always, not when I was very young in the hobby, but for many years at least, that has felt anticlimactic. It has felt like, oh well, you let my character escape a situation like that. Well, thank you, I should probably say, because I can still play my character, but you cheated in order to keep that character alive. If the rules don't mean anything to you, and I can't believe I'm saying that because of my relationship with being hard on rules, but if the rules mean so little to you, then why do we even roll dice in combat? And obviously that's the point. In a combat situation, I still do use rules. Consequently, it would be easier to just narrate a fight, which personally I do. If a group of extremely powerful characters come up against a group of absolute mooks, low level creatures, like for example in a recent episode of A Song of Tara, where two of the werewolves come up against a small group of vampire ghouls. None of these vampire ghouls are actually particularly powerful, and they are not armed with silver. So, and it's in an enclosed space where the ghouls don't have time to shoot at a distance to first weaken their opponents. It's inside a building, and they literally come upon each other, and close combat starts immediately. Those ghouls don't stand a snifter of a chance. They're going to get ripped to pieces. They're up against two powerful creatures to begin with, who, at least in one case, is a full-blooded warrior with the stats to back it up. He should be able to kill one of these things every round. And with at least a little bit of luck on her side, the same thing goes for his companion in this fight situation, who might not be statted as a warrior, but still has the stats of a guru in a shape-shifted form. In this case, they both used the Hispo form, which is only marginally less powerful than the than the Krynos form. And consequently, I simply narrated that fight because why should I pull everyone through half an hour or 45 minutes of dice rolling where everyone who isn't involved in that fight situation can only sit there and watch and cheer from the sidelines? Why should I waste my time on that and everyone else's time on that when the outcome is a foregone conclusion? And where the wounds inflicted on the Guru would be healed anyway within 30 seconds or something like that, where they would be able to simply stand there, focus for a little while, and the wounds would be gone. That doesn't seem like a good way to spend my time. But of course, to return to the issue of actually losing a character, when that happens, it should be allowed to happen. It shouldn't be avoided because of fudging dice. This, to me, is one of the most difficult aspects of being a storyteller or a GM. Is how do you balance a challenge? Because it's very easy to create a challenge which will result in a character death, but first and foremost, the character death, in my opinion, should not be a goal in and of itself. And secondly, even if you create a character or a challenge which is difficult enough for this to happen, you should not overdo it and make it a challenge which is too difficult, which is impossible to overcome. Because while the characters may experience that and still overcome it once in a while, it should then leave them with a, oh my goodness, look at how awesome we are. We just overcame the odds. We just did something which shouldn't be possible. We just did the impossible. And they should be allowed to revel in that. Remember, as the GM, you are not the enemy of the players. You are there to help them have a fantastic experience. Again, I've played with GMs who very, very quickly fell into a me versus the players kind of mindset, and personally, that's death to any campaign as far as I'm concerned. The moment I realize that's happening, I will, as a player, get up and leave. It's just not fun. You are there as a group together with the GM to have a good time and experience a story. The GM always has all the power. They can always throw something at you as players that you can never ever overcome. And that just isn't fun. It's not fun to have character death in abundance. It's not fun to have it happen all the time. Of course, the ominous threat of TPK, or total party kill, is always there. It can always happen. You can have a massive run of bad luck. You can be up against something equating an end of level boss, or even an end of story boss, and obviously, yeah, that can result in you dying wholesale. But in my opinion, if you've played through a long campaign and all your characters die in the end, everyone dies in the end, you have to be a fan of some pretty dark storytelling and writing. You have to be a fan of some real dystopia for that to be fulfilling for anyone except the GM. Remember what I said before about Captain Awesome standing on top of a pile of corpses waving the flag around? I'm not personally a fan of that trope. I don't like that. I am a fan of dystopias. I am a fan of dark writing, but I'm also a fan of people having a good time. Which means that while I might think that it is awesome for there to be plenty of death and sacrifice at the end, and whereas I, as a player, don't particularly mind when that happens, a lot of other people do. A lot of people kind of expect that, well, we've overcome the odds in even getting here in the end, then for goodness sakes, let us have this final victory. And there again comes the issue of balancing a challenge so that it's not impossible for the players to overcome. Also, please remember that usually, normally, the GM in any group will be one of the people, if not the person, who knows the rules the best, and they are the only people who know the full extent of the capabilities of the bad guy they're up against. And when we're talking about an end of level or an end of game boss, those capabilities are likely to be very, very considerable. They're likely to be such a creature is likely to be extremely powerful. They might suddenly pull a trick out of their sleeves, and then next round they might pull another trick out of their sleeves, because they have to be that dangerous. They have to be someone that the players have legitimate reason to fear. But if you create such a character who is so powerful that the players don't really stand a chance of overcoming it, because the boss is too powerful, then consider scaling them down just a little bit to give the players a fighting chance, because they should have at least a chance of reaching the fulfillment of winning the game. And please don't expect them, in the heat of the battle, in the heat of a really tense situation, don't expect them to be able to sit there calmly and rationally and remember every single little teeny tiny tidbit of information that they have gotten along the way. So let's say, for example, you create a situation where you can only defeat a boss if you complete a 20 actions sequence in the right order. Unless the players have been clever enough to write this down, which not all players are, then how are they supposed to remember 20 things in a row when they're also rolling dice to save their characters' lives? Don't expect that kind of thing of them. Make it a 4 or 5 action sequence instead, so that, hey, presto, they actually still stand a chance, but they still have to survive these 5 rounds of onslaught or whatever in order to overcome this horrific monstrosity they're up against. Then again, don't make it too easy on them. Don't make it so that they walk in there, see the evil overlord of everything, and they just walk up to him and splat him in a round or two, because that too is anticlimactic. So it's about striking a balance. It's about finding a balance in such things. And whatever you do, make it so that there is a chance, at least on the very powerful bosses, that some of the characters may in fact die, or be maimed, personally maimed. Let them, I don't know, let them get in the case of werewolf, let them end up with a serious and significant battle scar, which is going to impact them. Let them lose a leg from a silver weapon so they can't regenerate it. Whatever. Do something. Because it's the end of the story anyway, and consequently that the whole thing is over after that, so that when the characters in the end stand there, it's going to be less of a Captain Awesome moment and more of a, oh my goodness, we did this, we managed this, we overcame this. It's that way, in my opinion and in my experience, it tends to mean more to the players, that they have a feeling of actually having accomplished something which was difficult, and quite likely something that came at a significant cost, something that wasn't simple. It wasn't beating up 5 goblins with pig stickers. It was defeating the dragon, for example. And that sort of thing, at least to me as a GM or even as a player, it usually ends up with leaving the group with a better feeling about the whole thing. Even if it means that 1 or 2 characters ended up biting the dust in the final fight. They will be the heroes who gave the last full measure of devotion, to quote Abraham Lincoln, for the cause, the ones who ended up in the end being the heroes that are honored posthumously, because, well, they did in fact die. But that kind of hero, that kind of hero is no less a hero for that. And the player should be allowed to do this. If you are a player in a group where this is not allowed, where this kind of thing does not happen, I would suggest having a word with your GM about that sort of thing, because I would feel personally that that is unfulfilling. A GM who gloats about having killed a character is, to put it mildly, problematic. A GM who doesn't allow that dead character to continue to play some kind of posthumous role in the campaign, either by inspiring their that character's comrades to continue on, or by being a hero to the local community for having died in their defense or whatever, is doing something, and I'm not afraid to say this, is doing something wrong. I have experienced GMs who would simply get annoyed at seeing such things, who get annoyed if people kept bringing up dead characters. I've even once experienced the GM, just the ones, mind you, experienced a GM who said that he didn't want to hear about dead characters in his group anymore. They were dead and therefore no longer part of the campaign, and that just seemed incredibly odd and wrong. I would say that as a GM as well as a storyteller, make sure that the character, or the when a character dies, make sure that the player is all right. We're not talking about horror stories from the 1980s like the tragic ballad of Blackleaf, which is an ongoing trope from where a fundamentalist group would walk around role-playing stores and put these leaflets inside the covers of the rule books about this dreadful situation where an evil game master killed off a player's character just for the fun of it, and the player was so distraught by having lost this character that they ended up going off and killing themselves, and therefore the of course the not even implied but the openly stated goal of this pamphlet was to say that role-playing leads to suicide. That sort of thing is obviously complete and utter nonsense, and it should be refuted and rejected as patently false whenever it's encountered. But at the same time, you're probably friends with your players if you're the storyteller, and at least, even if you're not, at least you're still sharing an experience in the role-playing setting. And at least make sure that the player, when they have lost a character, then make sure that they're all right. Make sure they're not too upset. Talk to them about it. If they have any kind of complaint about how it happened, listen to them. Try to explain the rationale behind it happening, and make sure that there is a damn rationale to begin with, that it wasn't just a matter of, oh, well, I felt like it. Make sure that the character or the player feels, if not good, then at least better going forward, and possibly help them make a character that would fit in well with the group. If they don't have an idea already, try to help brainstorm with them. Come up with some way for that player to walk away from that week's game without feeling like absolute crap. As a player, on the other hand, when that happens to you, when you lose a character, don't rage quit, to use a computer game term. Don't just get up in a huff and walk away. Don't log off Skype if you play an internet campaign like we do with A Song of Tara. Don't do that, because if your GM is any good, this wasn't vengeful. This wasn't them just saying, "Oh, I don't like that player, I'm going to kill them off," or it wasn't a matter of just wanting to make an example of you or anything of the sort. It probably happened for a reason, and that reason may simply have been unfortunate dice roll. That may easily be the case, but then at least accept and acknowledge that it's just a matter of bad luck. Who knows? Possibly, if you're playing a campaign where the rules allow for the resurrection of dead characters, there's still a chance that you get back. If you're playing a campaign in which resurrection is not an option, then, well, alright, your character is dead, and that's sad and unfortunate, but it happened. Now make something of it, and don't be angry out of character. This, in the end, is what, and I'll finish up on that note, this, in the end, is the great pitfall of character deaths, obviously, is that it can bleed over from the in-game, in-character environment and into real life, and this is what needs to be avoided more than anything else. Always, 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 always remember that a game is a game. It's not a reflection of real life. It's not a matter of what happens in character should have any kind of bearing on your relationship to your fellow players or your storyteller out of character. It is simply a game. It is something that if you are not happy with it, you always have the option of walking away from, both as a storyteller and as players. Obviously, if you do so as a storyteller, you do have the responsibility for the campaign ending. But I have myself done it in the past, and I may still do it in the future. Walk away from a campaign where it has gone completely south, where the campaign simply isn't fun anymore because of disagreements with the players, because of the story having gotten so completely derailed that you can't find any inspiration in it anymore. If that has happened, then maybe sit down and give some thought to how that happened and how to avoid it in your next campaign, or you might risk it simply happening again. But whatever you do make sure that it stays in character. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, and the same thing goes for role-playing games. This can be particularly difficult when it involves a character death for the reasons I've already explained in this video. But it has to be said, and it has to be kept at the forefront of people's minds. It cannot be allowed to become a lasting issue. It shouldn't be that the next time you sit down there's simmering resentment between player and GM, or between players if the player ends up feeling like the rest of the group abandoned his or her character, left them to die, or refused to help, or whatever. There could be reasons for that. The character may have done things in character which are so reprehensible that the other characters no longer really wanted to associate themselves with that person. And obviously, if a character says, "Oh, I'm going to go and kill off this entire village of completely innocent civilians, and because we are a group, I expect and demand that my fellow players assist me in this." That sort of forcing one's fellow players to go along with things that they don't want to do is also unacceptable. And in a situation like that, the other characters would obviously be well within their rights to say, "No, my character doesn't want to do that." They would actually walk away and refuse to talk to you anymore. And when that murderous character then goes into the village full of civilians and finds that a high-level group of adventurers are sitting in the local inn, who are easily capable of dispatching him, then wow, he ends up dead, and he's then going to sit there and say, "Oh well, you abandoned me, you cretins, why didn't you help me?" That, of course, is also that's the kind of character death I call bullshit on something like that, because the player actually did that to themselves. Personally, I don't see character death as a problem. It's a storytelling tool, both for players and for the GM, but it needs to be handled carefully, and it needs to be handled with with a measure of respect to the series of events that lead up to it. It also needs to be handled with respect in relation to what comes after it. Um, it's not all right to just gloss it over and just be done with it, because it's unpleasant. I don't want to think about it. That sort of thing is problematic as well. Deal with it maturely. Deal with it as an adult, uh, and and go forward with it. Let it become part of the campaign. And when that happens, suddenly a character death can have a positive impact on the story. I think that's pretty much what I have to say on this topic, however. Thank you for listening in. If you have something to contribute to the discussion, or if you want to simply leave a comment, by all means do so in the text areas below. I, as usual, will ask you to be nice about it, even if you disagree with me. There's no reason to start name calling or anything of the sort. Um, that said, this is obviously only my opinion. I don't claim to hold the Philosopher's Stone or all the answers in any aspect of role-playing games. I'm not that conceited. These are simply my opinions on a matter which in this case remains a bone of contention in a huge number of role-playing groups. Again, I've seen it myself. I've experienced it over the years. Um, our group, the group I play in, and which you have a chance of listening into at the A Song of Tara uploads, we're all grown-ups. We're all adults. We all know how to cope with something like this. Every single one of us, or at least very nearly every single one of us, um, has experienced character death in the past. It sucks, um, but it doesn't have to continue to suck. It can be something that in the end helps in a positive way for the campaign. So yeah, I'm going to end on that note. Thank you for listening, and by all means, do listen in the future to other uploads that we make, whether more on this series or our A Song of Tara campaign, or any of the other videos that are going to get uploaded to Charismatoac. Yeah, take care and have fun role-playing. Bye.